back to the topic of this debate.
The slaughter of actual
I'm here to speak about what's actually happening.
Okay, look, I'm making. Let me. Hang on.
As a propagandist for Israel.
And then in Gaza, you have this massive net where you arrest every single man you see, lock them up, torture them, possibly kill them, and then see what happens later.
Where if you're a Palestinian that the Israelis deem to be a terrorist, then you can be executed. But the same law.
Murder someone, you are a terrorist.
Including Jewish Israelis?
Once again, journalist Ana Kasparian clashes with American-Israeli commentator Emily Schrader. And as usual, it doesn't take long before Ana begins dismantling Emily's arguments one after another, turning political talking points into uncomfortable questions with no clear answers.
Okay, but Emily, my response to that would be, yes, you're right, because there was widespread condemnation all around the world, and because I think the Israeli government panicked and realized how bad it looked, particularly with Christians in America, who are their biggest paymasters and supporters. But then it begs the question, if they can respond that quickly and with such clarity and authority and decisiveness and take disciplinary action, why couldn't they do the same when you had people being killed wrongly in Gaza, as happened multiple times, including, in my estimation, a number of journalists who were just doing their job. Over 200 journalists were killed in that war. And you know,
well,
I'm afraid...
obviously, you know I'm going to dispute you on that figure, but...
Well, no, it's not disputable. The only dispute is whether any of them had...
Because many of these journalists were not journalists, Piers.
It's not disputed that...
You're not a journalist. You are not a journalist, okay? You, born and raised in LA...
I hear a lot of background noise. I'd like to get back to the question that you were asking, Piers.
For a genocidal regime in the Middle East. That's what you are. You're a propagandist for a genocidal regime in the Middle East, talking about...
Can we get back to the actual topic of this debate, please?
We're focusing on the topic of the debate.
Can we get back to the topic of this debate?
You are justifying the slaughter of actual journalists.
I'm here to speak about what's actually happening on the ground,
hang on.
As a propagandist for Israel,
I will let you,
You're propagandist.
Anna, you can respond in a moment, but I'm making the point, which I think is a valid one, which is, why is it the IDF and the Israeli government could respond so quickly to the desecration of a statue of Jesus, but cannot respond with anything like the same speed to the killing of journalists, many of whom were genuine journalists doing their job?
Probably Rob and Doron can answer this even better than me, but I think the most distinct and obvious difference is that one occurs in the fog of war, and it takes time to be able to determine who was where, when, what footage is there, what information is there available, versus a photo where you can clearly see who it was and what happened, and they evaluated that fairly quickly. Now, that said, I agree with you. I think there needs to be more transparency, and there also needs to be more speedy answers to a lot of these things. We're on the same page on this. I'm not disputing you at all on that front.
And on the question of the 9,000 or so Palestinian prisoners in Israeli jails, why is it that so many have not had a free and fair trial yet?
Good question.
Under administrative detention, Israel does reserve the right in order to preemptively arrest people up to 6 months with court permission, and that is what's happened. All of those 9,000 are not under administrative detention, but we know that after October 7th, there were thousands of arrests in order to determine who was a part of what happened. In fact, I would go even further than that and point out that a lot of the Palestinians who were arrested, we didn't know, because we didn't know on October 7th who had entered Israel. There were people they found many months later that were involved in the October 7th massacres who had been hiding inside of Israel. So there is an over response to what happened in order to get control of the situation.
But at the comparison of what we're talking about here, on the one hand, people who commit crimes in Israeli jails, it's fog of war, we can't arrest, there's no way of knowing. And then in Gaza, you have this massive net where you arrest every single man you see, lock them up, torture them, possibly kill them, and then see what happens later. All of a sudden, the fog of war doesn't matter. You have the widest net possible. And when it's Israelis committing these crimes, no one gets arrested, no one gets investigated. It's fog of war. What can you do? But with Gaza, you can bring everyone in. It just shows you that Jews are not held accountable in Israel and Palestinians are held accountable, whether they committed crimes or not. Every Palestinian is seen as...
Well, but on that point, Emily, for example, the thing that precipitated Ben Gvir getting this cake from his wife with the noose on it was the scene from the Knesset of him celebrating wildly with champagne after winning a new policy going through in the Knesset to have a two-tier system of death penalty policy now, where where if you're a Palestinian that the Israelis deem to be a terrorist, then you can be executed. But the same law doesn't apply to Israelis who may commit an act of terrorism. And, this is a country where you've had prime ministers killed by right-wing Israeli terrorists. Okay, so it's not like it doesn't happen. So what do you say to that? Are you comfortable with a two-tier legal system about things like the death penalty?
I am not a supporter of this law. In principle, I don't have a problem with the death penalty being applied. However, I do want to clarify, just for the viewers, that the law that was passed, the one that we saw Ben Gvir celebrating, is less about being two-tier. What it states isn't that anyone who's a terrorist can qualify for the death penalty. It's that anyone who is convicted of murdering people, so it has to be a capital offense, and it also has to be of a nationalistic nature. That's what it's classified as. Now, how that affects Palestinians differently is because Palestinians are prosecuted in military courts. So it operates through a different system because they are an active combatant. They're considered an active enemy entity to the state of Israel.
Pay close attention to this point. This is not just about one law. When Palestinians are treated as an enemy entity, justice itself becomes part of the problem.
I do have a problem with the application of it, but all of that being said, it's not going to stand. It's going to get struck down or at least modified by the courts, and frankly, it should. I think we need to be very smart about how we deal with such situations. We don't want to see people like Yahya Sinwar spending time in Israeli prison being treated by Israeli doctors for brain cancer and then being released and planning things like October 7th. We need to be intelligent about how we're dealing with murderers with blood on their hands, and I don't believe that this law was the best way to do it, but I do think that we do need to revise how we review some of these cases.
All right, Anna, your response.
Obviously, it is a two-tier justice system when one group of people, and I want to note, Emily Schrader didn't say Hamas. She said Palestinians are seen as enemy combatants. But yeah, the application of this law
with
is
capital
obviously
offenses?
meant
Yes.
to... Excuse
if
me.
you murder someone, you are a terrorist.
Including Jewish Israelis? You think they should, if Jewish Israelis carry out murder? So can I finish my point without Emily and her screeching voice interrupting me constantly? Let me just finish my point, okay? The issue is the fact that Palestinians are tried in a military prison, or I'm sorry, military courts, as opposed to Jewish Israelis. I mean, this law is an extension of the apartheid system that Israel has been operating under for decades now. That is the problem. This law is yet another symptom of that deeper foundational problem within Israeli society. Israelis would like us to believe that they're the only democracy in the Middle East, that it's a wonderful utopia that Americans would love. It's very much in line with the Western world. It is not in line with the Western world. It is very important for the American people to understand that our special ally operates in ways that we would find absolutely horrendous. We would consider it treachery. And the idea that we continue to fund that government, fund that military, despite all of the atrocities that have been committed in Gaza, in the West Bank, now in Lebanon, also in Iran. By the way, quickly going back to your point about we don't know who bombed the school in Manab. We do know. Sadly, it was the United States because we're the only ones who have Tomahawk missiles, and Tomahawk missiles were used to bomb that school. And it wasn't simply one strike. It wasn't two strikes. It was 4 strikes. Okay, so that was a horrific situation. And I hate the fact that we as Americans have blood on our hands for carrying out that atrocity. But atrocities happen. It's one thing to realize you've committed an atrocity, use actual punishment to prevent it from happening again. But that's not what's happening here. It's certainly not happening in Israel. It's not happening with our government, certainly under the leadership of Donald Trump. I mean, the guy thinks that we're winning the war in Iran. He keeps telling us that he's decimated their military. We just got New York Times reporting yesterday saying that Iran was able to access most of their mobile missile launchers along the Strait of Hormuz. 70% of their missiles are still intact. Just, it's lie after lie after lie.